has been some debate over what the Adventures of Tom Sawyer is really about. There are those who argue that it's just a loose compilation of autobiographical material, and there is some evidence to support this claim. But most scholars agree that Twain has arranged the episodes of the story to emphasize various themes, often related to Tom's growth toward maturity. And then there's a bunch of arguing about what those themes are. My thesis is that The Adventures of Tom Sawyer is about Tom trying to figure out pretty much the same thing that America was trying to figure out at the time. What America is still trying to figure out. Which is preferable, independence or interdependence? Going west or staying east? Freedom or the embrace of a community with its associated trade-offs, like a little less personal liberty? The whole story of Tom Sawyer is about the tension between these two things. And in the end, Tom makes his decision. The novel begins with Tom caught between his need for a stable home environment and his personal independence. On the one side are the forces that would socialize Tom, domesticate him even. Aunt Polly at home, and the church and the school as representatives of the larger community. At the center of the rules and regulations that govern the community of St. Petersburg is the judge. Opposed to these forces is the lure of freedom and independence, as exemplified by the life of Huck Finn. In the beginning of the novel, Tom is not committed to one or the other. Placing Tom in the home of his aunt rather than that of his parents weakens the lure of hearth and home. In the first chapter, Tom is chafing against the restrictions of home life, but he does so in the context of the stable home that Aunt Polly provides. His rebellion is manifested in the pilfering of homemade jam and skipping school. The revelation of this infraction is discovered at the family dinner, and it shows Tom caught between the two worlds of freedom and restrictions that society imposes on the individual. Later in the first chapter, he fights against the well-dressed stranger, whose dainty cap and necktie ate into Tom's vitals. The real confrontation is symbolic of the battle against an alternate image of boyhood that the opponent represents. His clothing conforms to the community standards. Clearly, Tom is resisting these expectations of society, but his rebellion is not complete. It's not transgressive, but only digressive, meaning that Tom doesn't cross the boundaries, but he works within them and tests them. The famous fence painting scene illustrates this superbly. Tom does not transgress in that the fence was ultimately painted, but he does digress from expectations by not doing the work himself. Tom also resists the socializing forces of the church and school. The church and school are community institutions dedicated to the socialization of the young, teaching them to do what is right and to be good. And here too we see Tom caught between the restrictions of community and the lure of freedom. The Sunday school teacher says this: "Now, children, I want you all to sit up as straight and pretty as you can, and to give me all your attention for a minute or two. There, that's it. That is the way good little boys and girls should do." Right after this quote, one little girl is chastised for looking out of the window, a symbol of the domain of freedom. The learning of memory verses is a part of the process of socialization, and with the help of Mary, Tom attempts to learn his verses, but without success. Still, through his own cleverness, he's able to secure a Bible, which is the reward for memorization. And he receives commendation under false pretenses from the judge, again the symbolic center of the community. In the church service, Tom is made to sit furthest away from the window and the seductive outside. Those are the words that Twain uses. So we see this vital tension in the novel. Tom is caught between the lure of freedom and the call of community. Into this unstable world, a new force appears. On the community side, Becky Thatcher. Twain's language reveals the attraction of this lovely little blue-eyed creature with yellow hair. Tom worshipped this new angel. But when community seems like the obvious choice now, with Becky involved, circumstances push him the other way. First, Aunt Polly accuses Tom of breaking the sugar bowl. When Sid dropped the bowl, Tom was in ecstasies, in anticipation of the punishment that Sid would receive. But instead, Polly assumed that Tom was responsible, and the potent palm fell upon him. Following this domestic injustice, Tom leaves in a sulk and he finds himself near Becky's home. And he wonders if the sacred presence is there. As he waits by the window, Tom's holy calm is profaned by the voice of a maidservant, and he is deluged with washing water. Then, at school, he declares his love for Becky and even receives a kiss. However, he blunders in referring to his previous engagement to Amy Lawrence, and Becky cries. He tries to offer her his most prized possession, a brass knob from the top of an andiron, but she refuses the gift. This is the last straw, and Tom leaves. Not only the school, but the community altogether. Tom's escape to Jackson's Island is an attempt to resolve the conflict between community and freedom in favor of the freedom. But on Jackson's Island, the conflict is intensified as Tom learns the joys, but also the significant drawbacks of freedom. from the community. Tom and his friend Joe Harper and Huck escape the confines of society and plan to lead a life of crime. They will be pirates. As Tom wakes up the first morning, he peacefully observes an inchworm, then ants hauling dead spiders, and later a ladybug. These images show Tom how natural and serene complete independence is compared to the rigid rules imposed by society. Symbolic of their rebellion, Huck teaches Tom and Joe how to smoke, but they became violently ill. Symbolic of the excesses of freedom? Further, Tom could not keep back the thoughts of certain persons at home. So, unable to completely ignore the draw of home, Tom secretly returns and spies on the grieving Aunt Polly, and he was touched by his aunt's grief. He returns to the island only because he plans for a more dramatic return home. That night, the island has become less hospitable. At midnight, there is a brooding oppressiveness. The ensuing storm was violent. It was a wild night for homeless young heads to be out in. Tom could not ignore the security of home, in spite of its restrictions. The boys' return to the community is during their own funeral service. And after some scolding and a happy homecoming, Tom accepts incorporation again into the community. Huckleberry Finn represents the call of freedom. Huck shares a love of freedom and adventure with Tom, but he lives outside of the community. Huck is described as the juvenile pariah of the village, and Tom envied his gaudy, outcast condition. Since he is the son of the rarely seen town drunkard, not only is Huck independent of any parental restrictions, he also remains free of the town's socializing institutions, the school and the church. He embodies what Tom desires. The relationship between Tom and Huck changes gradually over the course of the novel, as Tom moves toward accepting community. Initially, Tom looks up to Huck with admiration and uses his friendship to make his own life seem more rebellious. But eventually, Tom becomes the leader and Huck the follower. One day, Tom is overcome with the raging desire to go somewhere and dig for hidden treasure, and he seeks out Huck to assist. On this quest, Tom is clearly the source of all knowledge regarding the nature and location of buried treasure. His leadership continues as the boys plot to secure the treasure they hear that Injun Joe has hidden away. The shift in the relationship between the two boys shows Tom's progression toward community and away from the independence that Huck represents. When Tom decides to testify in court regarding the death of Dr. Robinson, he follows his conscience to uphold the law and justice. Tom testifies to Muff Potter's innocence and declares Injun Joe's guilt, but in doing so he breaks the vow of silence that he had made with Huck, indicating a split between the two. In his decision to testify, Tom declares his loyalty to the community, rather than the independence that Huck demonstrates by his willingness to remain silent. But Tom isn't fully committed yet. The next episode involves Injun Joe, who is symbolic of the extreme freedom of being outside the community and the law, as is illustrated by his temporary occupation as body snatcher, and in his violence and murder of the doctor, an important person in the community. When Tom makes his appearance in court and tells the truth about Injun Joe's guilt, he chooses the side of justice and the restrictions of freedom found in society. The latter escapes from the court through a window, still representing the seductive outside. From that point on, the shadow of Injun Joe begins to infest all of Tom's dreams. And the inevitable confrontation between Tom and his symbol of extreme freedom builds through the novel to the extent that in one heightened instance he almost stepped on Injun Joe's hand. It is in McDougal's cave that everything becomes clear for Tom. It's one of those belly of the whale moments. Here's how Twain describes it. McDougal's cave was but a vast labyrinth of crooked aisles that ran into each other and out again and led nowhere. It was said that one might wander for days and nights together through its intricate tangle of rifts and chasms and never find the end of the cave, and that he might go down and still down into the earth, and it was just the same, labyrinth underneath labyrinth, and no end to any of them. No man knew the cave. It's a bit of a psychological setting, delving deep into the unknown realms of oneself. In Tom's journey with Becky into McDougal's cave, they are symbolically taken completely out of the community. Tom faces not only his own death, but more importantly that of Becky. He was appalled with the idea that she might die. When they tried to comfort each other, Tom rested with her and they talked of home and the friends there and the comfortable beds and above all the light. Tom's concern for Becky's life and the comfort they find in domestic images illustrates the extent of his transformation, and this is augmented as they share their wedding cake and a kiss. While in the cave, separated from community, Tom intensely experiences that which he truly values, Becky and the security of home that she represents. Tom's story parallels that of Injun Joe as the narrative alternates between their stories. While Tom worries about Becky and reflects on the security of domestic life, life and eats wedding cake, Injun Joe plans an attack on the widow Douglas. Here we see his most severe transgression of all social standards. He plans to slit her nostrils and notch her ears, and then tie her to the bed. His plans clearly suggest a deadly rape. Serious stuff in a 19th century boy's book. But this intended assault on the kind and helpless woman is symbolic of Injun Joe's disregard for the community, and the extremes to which his expressions of individual freedom extend. Later, the parallel between Tom and Injun Joe is strengthened when Tom sees Injun Joe in the cave. Tom emerges, Injun Joe does not. Symbolically, in the death of Injun Joe, the lure of complete freedom from society has also died within Tom. Through this ordeal, Tom has died and has been reborn. And through this rebirth, he has been transformed. The extreme transgression of community values that Injun Joe represents is dead, and Tom emerges from the crisis in the cave and is finally incorporated into the community. Tom is an orphan, but in the end he seems to find a symbolic father, Judge Thatcher, who accepts him into the community. The relationship between Tom and Judge Thatcher was initially one of alienation. The judge inspires awe when he visits the Sunday school. He was altogether the most august creature the children had ever looked upon, and they wondered what kind of material he was made of, and they half wanted to hear him roar, and were half afraid he might too. This description shows that to the children the judge is both god and monster. Tom responds to the judge as a rival, and with a spirit of showing off, he produces enough tickets to receive the Bible prize. Tom is elevated to the judicial one's altitude, and the school has two marvels to gaze upon in the place of one. Clearly, in his early associations, Tom sees the judge as an adversary. After Tom and Becky's safe return from the cave, the judge conceived a great opinion of Tom. When told of Tom's lie, which spared Becky a whipping at school, Thatcher transforms Tom's mighty lie into one that is noble, generous, and magnanimous. He goes so far as to compare Tom with George Washington and continues to lay out Tom's future. He will be a great lawyer or a great soldier. It is the future of any properly socialized boy. It aligns with the expectations of esteemed institutional vocations and solidifies Tom's status within the community. As through the entire novel, Tom's position is finally contrasted to that of Huck Finn. Where Tom has been fully incorporated into the community by the words of Judge Thatcher, Huck experiences social oppression. The widow Douglas takes him in. Huck Finn's wealth and the fact that he was now under the widow Douglas's protection introduced him into society. No, dragged him into it, hurled him into it, and his sufferings were almost more than he could bear. The widow's servants kept him clean and neat, combed and brushed. He had to eat with a knife and a fork. He had to use napkin, cup, and plate. He had to learn his book. He had to go to church. He had to talk so properly that speech was become insipid in his mouth. Whithersoever he turned, the bars and shackles of civilization shut him in and bound him hand and foot. Tom, on the other hand, becomes an advocate for the restrictions imposed by society. He sees also the benefits of the security that one finds in community. To illustrate Tom's complete conformity to community expectations, he takes the role of policing Huck, who tries to escape all of this control and order. So Tom fills the father role as he attempts to initiate Huck into the community. He's fully committed to interdependence rather than independence. Tom Sawyer's adventures are not merely a collection of Twain's recollections from his childhood. They are events that, taken en masse, depict Tom's journey from being caught in the tension between community expectations and individual independence, from being caught in the tension between community expectations and individual independence, through the cave to where he accepts and is welcomed into community. Well, that's my reading at least. Thank you, and we will see you next time.